Alright, this is Algebra 1 for 6th and 7th periods. We are doing a new lesson today on solving quadratic equations. I'll see if anyone's going to join live. I'll wait just a minute. No one's here yet. I'll see if anyone's going to join live. I'll wait just a minute. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and get started. No one's on here right now, but that's okay. I'm hoping that some of you will go back and watch this. This is important lessons that we're learning about quadratics. It's very important to Algebra 2. So let's get started. First of all, our goal today is to solve quadratic equations by using square roots. When you have a quadratic equation, we've already learned that the graph forms a parabola. And remember, we learned how to find the y-intercept on a parabola by looking at its equation. We learned how to find the vertex by looking at the graph. Now what we've got to do is see how to find the x-intercepts, because the x-intercepts are on the x-axis. And when they're on the x-axis, that point has a 0 coordinate for y. So y equals 0 whenever the parabola crosses the x-axis. And so that's your solution, actually, for your equation. When you see a quadratic equation, you can solve it. And when you solve it, you'll know what those x-intercepts are. And so we have 3 ways that we're going to learn how to solve these quadratic equations. One way is through square roots, which is what we're doing today. One way is by factoring, and one way is by the quadratic formula. There's another way that we're not going to learn this year. You'll learn it in Algebra 2. So what this says, the solutions to a quadratic equation are the x-intercepts. That's just what I told you. When you solve the equation, you'll know where the parabola crosses the x-axis. And so our goal today is to solve these, to know what x equals. Of course, I used other letters because IXL does. I like using x all the time whenever I'm solving quadratic equations. But I just threw in other variables because IXL does. Alright, so let's look at example 1. These equations do not have a b term. And by b term, I mean, you know, the standard form that we learned for a quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c. So we've had things like x squared plus 3x minus 4. We've had things like that. And on your last lesson, you learned that this minus 4 down here at the end, the c term, is where the parabola crosses the y-axis. But in all these equations that you have today, we're not going to have this middle term right here. We're not going to have that bx term. We're just going to have the squared term and the c. And so whenever you just have the squared term and the c, the easiest way to solve it is through square roots. And so that's what we are I'm going to be doing today is solving by square roots. Oh, I have somebody watching. That's exciting. So let's look at example 1. We have x squared equals 36. When it starts out in this form and all you have over here on this left side is your squared or your quadratic term, then you can solve this equation by taking the square root. Because if you use common sense, what you're trying to do is find out what x equals so that you can square it and get 36. Well, you probably already know the answer, but I'm going to show you the process of solving it because later on you'll need to know that process. So anytime you have your variable to the second power and that's all you've got on that left side, you're ready to solve it. Anytime you're solving an equation, you do the opposite operation of what is being done to x at the start. So what is the opposite operation of squaring something? Well, we learned that a few weeks ago. It's taking the square root. So what we're going to do is take the square root of this side because the square root cancels out the exponent too, and you're just left with x, and that's what we want. We just want x by itself. If you do something to one side of an equation, to keep it balanced, you've got to do the exact same thing to the other side. So we've got to also take the square root of 36. Now, when you solve an equation involving a square root, you always have two answers because 6 times 6 is 36, but also negative 6 times negative 6 is 36. So you get two answers when you're solving these equations. And to show our two answers, we always write it as plus or minus. That means positive or negative, and then you take the square root of 36 and put 6. So your answer is positive and negative 6. Now, I would let you leave it that way if it was just me giving you a test or a worksheet, but IXL wants you to enter in the two separate answers. So you're going to enter in your answers as x equals 6 and then x equals negative 6. Okay, so that's your two answers. And remember, on these, you're going to get most every time. I'll show you a few cases where you don't, but most every time you're going to get two answers. Okay, example 2. Solve n squared equals 100. Again, we've got our variable by itself on this left side. We just have to get the little 2 to cancel out. So we have to take the square root of both sides. When you take the square root of n to the second, you just get n because it cancels the little 2 out. When you take the square root of 100, you get 10, but you have to put plus or minus 10. So that means your answer is n equals 10 or n equals negative 10. Example 3. We have z squared minus 64 equals 0. So how is this example different from 1 and 2? Let me put the boxes. Y'all know how this is different from example 1 and 2? You don't have z squared by itself on the left side. You've got this minus 64, so you can't take the square root yet. What you've got to do is add 64 to both sides to get that 64 to cancel out over here because you don't want it on this side with your z squared. So those cancel, and you get z to the second equals 0 plus 64. And now you're ready to square, or not square, but take the square root of both sides. So we're going to take the square root of the left side and the right side. And when I say left side, right side, I'm talking about the left side of the equal sign and the right side of the equal sign. So when you take the square root of z to the second, you half your exponent and you get z. When you take the square root of 64, you get plus or minus 8, because 8 times 8 is 64. And then you'll enter in your two answers. Z equals 8 and z equals negative 8. This is pretty easy. I hope everybody's going to watch this and do this IXL lesson, because this is going to be an easy lesson An easy lesson to get to 100 on also to get you some bonus points. And y'all, the quickest way to get your grade to jump up is to try to get to 100 on as many as possible, because every time you get more than a 100% on these, it's going to increase your grade a good bit. All right, let's go on to example 4. Example 4. Solve x squared plus 40 equals 161. All right, so again, we have this plus 40 on the left side that's with our x squared, and we don't want that plus 40 there. We want only the x squared there. We have to get rid of it. And to get rid of a plus 40, we've got to come under and do minus 40 to make them cancel out. That means we've got to do minus 40 on the right side. And then subtract. 161 minus 40 is going to be 121. And then you take the square root of both sides. And the square root of 121 is 11, but you've got to do plus or minus. So it's going to be x equals plus or minus 11, which means your answers are positive 11 or negative 11. Okay, we have one more example that's like these, and then I'm going to switch it to a different type of problem that you'll have. Look at example 5. We have p squared plus 16 equals 16. So our first step is to subtract the 16 on this side so we can have p squared by itself. And they'll cancel out, and we do minus 16 on the right side. So you have p squared equals, what is 16 minus 16? 0. So what you're saying is, what do I have to square to get 0? And you know the answer is going to be 0, right? So we're going to do the square root on both sides, and you get p equals, well, when you do the square root of 0, you don't put plus or minus on that one, because you can never have a negative 0. 0 is just 0. So we're going to put 0 down, and that's your only answer. So the only time you're just going to get one answer is if what you're taking the square root of is 0. That's the only time you'll get one answer. The other times you're going to get two answers. Most of the other times. I'm going to show you our last example, I believe, will show you one where you won't get any answers. Alright, so look at example 6. This changes up. Instead of saying solve, look at what it asks. It says, how many real solutions does the equation have? And it's going to give you multiple choice. It's going to, on all of these, it's going to say no real solution, one real solution, or two real solutions. Well, you don't even have to work it out. You can just kind of look and see. Remember, I told you that you're always going to have two answers unless this is 0 right here where the 25 is. Now, you will have a no real solution if that number is negative, because you can't take the square root of a negative number. And I'll show you one like that in just a minute. But on m squared equals 25, if I told you to solve that, you would get plus or minus 5 because you take the square root of 25. So you're going to get two answers. Just like on all of these, you're going to get two answers unless that's a 0, and then you'll get 1. Unless that's a negative, and then you'll get none. Okay, so in this case, it's going to be two real solutions. So look at example 7. Now this one we need to work out and see what we're going to get over here when we subtract our 15, because the first step on this one is to subtract 15. So if we subtract 15, we get n squared equals 15 minus 15, which is 0. Remember, if you get 0 over here, when you take the square root, you just get one answer. So anytime that's a 0, it's going to be one real solution. And then on example 8, we want to do the same thing on this one, because this one starts out where you have to subtract your 24. So we're going to subtract 24 from 0. And when you subtract 24, you get 0 minus 24, which is going to give you a negative 24 when you subtract 0 minus 24. You cannot take the square root of a negative number. It's not possible. There's not anything that you can multiply by itself to get a negative. So anytime this comes out to be negative, your answer is no real solutions. And that's really all there is to this lesson. You're going to have the ones where you've got to solve it, and you're going to have the ones where they ask you how many solutions it has. And they're all this simple. In fact, all 8 of these examples came from your IXL. I went through the lesson and picked out the examples to do. So it's that easy. There may be one more. Let me see. Yeah, there is one more, because I remembered one more that was just a little bit more complicated. So here's example 9. And the only reason this one's a little bit more complicated is you have to do 2 steps when you're solving it. You've got 100 v to the second minus 94 equals negative 90. And remember, you're trying to solve for v. But now before you take the square root to get that v, you've got to take this minus 94 and get rid of that. So we're going to say plus 94 on both sides. That gives you 100 v to the second equals negative 90 plus 94. You have to subtract those because the signs are different, and you get 4. Okay, next step, you still have a number in front of your v squared. So just like you would do if you just had 100v, you have to divide by that 100. So that was my daughter sneezing, by the way. You've got to divide by 100. And then those 100s cancel. And you end up with v equals, I'm sorry, that's v squared. Don't forget about the little 2 because that's going to change everything. V squared equals 4 over 100. Well, 4 over 100 reduces, and you need to reduce that. 4 goes into itself 1 time, and 4 goes into 100 25 times. Now, that's not your answer, because remember, you've got to take the square root. So I'm out of room right here. I'm going to move over to this space to finish that problem out. So I'm just going to rewrite what I have right now. V squared equals 1 over 25. And I'm going to back up for a minute and make sure you know how I got that. I had to add 94 over here to my negative 90. And when I add negative 90 plus 94, I get 4. Because I had a 100 in front of v squared, I had to divide by 100. So I end up with 4 over 100 equals v squared. Well, 4 over 100 reduces to 1 over 25. And that's where we are right now. V squared equals 1 over 25. Well, remember, you want to know what v equals, not v squared. So we have to take the square root of both sides. And when you take the square root of v to the second, you get v. Remember, when you take the square root in an equation, it's always plus or minus. Take the square root of the top number in a fraction, which is 1. Take the square root of the bottom number in the fraction, which is 5. So you get plus or minus 1/5. That means your 2 answers are positive 1/5 and negative 1/5. All right? So, like I said, it's easy to get up to 80 pretty fast on this BB6, on this IXL lesson. If I were you, I would try to get a 100 on this one. So, your assignment is IXL, as always. Algebra 1, we are on BB6. We're in the BBs now. We've done BB1, BB13, and now we're going back to BB6. And you need to get a SMART score of 80. All right, I hope y'all have a great day. Do your work. Bring those grades up. And I will see you Thursday. Bye.